All right, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. We got some echoes going on. So please go ahead and mute yourself if you're somewhere. We have somebody in a car. Can't miss this. This is so exciting. Again, please mute yourself if you're joining us. We get to different points where we have questions, that sort of thing. You want to unmute yourself, that's fine too. And we're gonna have a really good time tonight. We're gonna be talking about college admissions essays. Debbie is a bit under the weather, so you may see her, but you will likely not hear her because we can barely hear when she does speak. But thanks for coming tonight, Debbie. We also have Abby here as well. She's from my team here at Prompt. She's actually a former admissions officer from UPenn and from some other universities. She knows the ins and outs of the entire admissions process. And she wasn't even supposed to be here tonight, so she is our special guest, added treat. Huge benefit, and you're going to learn a lot from her this evening as well. So once again, please go ahead and mute yourself so we don't have to forcibly mute you. I think Debbie's going through and like forcibly muting people right now. I can see it in her face. What the hell? Debbie, you muted me. There it is. Abby, you're muted too. Okay, so this is going to be recorded this evening. So if you can't stay for the whole time, you'll be able to catch up. Your student's not here with you. Guess what? You can have them watch this later. A lot of really good content for them as well. And we're gonna go ahead and get started. But before we do, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Number one, if you have questions as we are going, please drop them into the chat. Okay. Abby's going to be monitoring the chat. I'm going to be monitoring the chat. Anything that's relevant kind of as we're going to take. Okay. And that's one. Number two, as we're getting started, please drop into the chat. One, name. Two, where are you from? Three, on a scale of 1 to 10, how scared of you are of this college admissions essay process, and by how scared of you, I mean like 10 is like extremely scared. I have no idea what I'm going to do. Oh my goodness, what's happening here? And then 1 would be like, this is cake. I got this. While we have a 4, like, it's cool. You don't even have to be here, I guess. Anybody like 6 or below, a little less so, but we have some in the middle, some really high, typically here. Also, if you have a draft of your essay, be like, hey, I already have a draft. That's always a good and fun and exciting thing. And people did submit their drafts to us. We're only going to be able to probably, Abby, take a look at maybe 2 of them.
Yeah.
Like that. So we have a bunch up and we're just literally going to randomly select some tabs. And that's how we do this. We haven't even looked at the essays.
I love the person who didn't give a number. They just wrote terrified.
I guess terrified could be a number, right? Terrified could be a number. As you can tell, Abby is like this really mean person who used to be an admissions officer. No, admissions officers are nice people. Abby, how old were you when you were, you were just, you don't have to give age, but you were like relatively recently out of college when you were admissions officer.
Yeah,
like
it was
first started, right?
My first like real job out of college. Yep. It was interesting reading essays from people who were and applications from folks who are not that much younger than me. Like I was in their shoes a few years earlier, right? So
yeah, and by the way, the reason why I bring this up is this is really important because we're going to be talking about your audience a lot tonight. Abby is was your audience, okay? And so we're going to be talking a lot about that, and Abby's going to be giving her perspective, like how she's reading applications, kind of how she is kind of thinking about different things kind of along the way. It's going to be a lot of fun. I am going to go, I love this. We have Mary, who's like, my son says it's a 3, but I have a feeling Mary's a little higher than a 3. Didn't put that in there, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We got a lot of great content this evening. And let's go ahead and dive in. So Abby and I are from a company called Prompt, and we are the largest college admissions essay and application coaching company globally. Things that we're going to talk about today is really the importance of college essays to getting accepted. This is really from like the perspective of your audience, right? The admissions officers and how they're looking at these essays, how to really write essays that are actually matching with what colleges are looking for, choosing the right topic, why that's so important. We're going to talk a little about Prompt's essay coaching, plus we have a discount running through Sunday, and we have a special tonight only discount. If you're interested in any of that, you can go to myprompt.com/road2college. We're going to drop that into the chat as well, or Debbie might drop that into the chat. So you have that link. It's also at the bottom here, myprompt.com/road2college. Then we're going to do Q&A. We're going to do live feedback on essays you submitted. We're going to get my opinion and Abby's opinion, who matters more than me, and dive in. All right, Abby, anything you wanted to touch on before we rock and roll?
No, I think I'm ready to dive in though.
Okay, sounds good. So just a little bit about Prompt. We've coached over 30,000 students one-on-one on their college applications and essays, okay, including hundreds and hundreds of road to college families, and so on and so forth. So what do admissions officers care about? So quite simply, like the way to think about this is that admissions officers, from reading your application, are trying to make a determination whether or not they believe that your student will succeed at their college and after they graduate. Okay, Abby, why is that? What you want to add some color to?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think most students kind of probably already guessed that colleges are looking to admit students who are going to be successful academically, right? I think that's pretty much a given. But college admissions officers care much more than like kind of beyond the classroom, right? Admissions officers want you to succeed in your classes, but also be an active contributor to campus life, right? And colleges really care about that because a vibrant campus environment really helps them recruit the types of students that they're looking for, right? College admissions officers and colleges also really care that you graduate for a number of reasons. Number one, graduation rates and job placement rates, these are all things that matter, right? You guys are probably looking at these data points as you're looking at the colleges that you might be applying for. They also matter to things like rankings and accreditation, which are super, super important on the admissions front. And they want you to graduate and, I mean, obviously succeed, do well, hopefully talk about the colleges in a positive light, right? Colleges love to be able to pick out alumni to feature and to bring back as, you know, guest lecturers involved on campus. You know, hopefully we always hope that our alumni end up going out there and, you know, maybe crediting the school a little bit to their success and like helping them getting to where they are. Best case scenario, we love alumni who are successful and donate to the college. So this is really kind of some of the reasons that we really care. We make you go through the application process, right? Because we're trying to really determine if you are going to be successful in that particular college and well beyond that.
Yeah. And so once again, a lot of this stuff kind of comes down to money, rankings, those types of things, but those are the things that actually matter to admissions officers. And so what that means is that this is kind of how they're evaluating applicants. Yes, they're looking holistically, they're looking at a lot of different things, but you know, this is kind of the easy way to break it down. I'm going to pass it over to Abby to kind of give you all the breakdown of how you know, admissions officers are actually reading these applications.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you talk to any admissions officer, I would say at any college, I'm sure you're going to hear the word holistic, right? And a lot of times admissions officers just kind of leave it at that and doesn't really, you know, tell you much about what that holistic review looks like. But really a holistic review is made up of these three components that you see here in front of you. The first would be your academic score, right? And it is a singular score, but it's comprised of a couple different items that make up that score. So the first would be your grades, right? So certainly your GPA, but colleges look at GPAs in a number of ways. Sometimes, you know, certain schools will look at your cumulative GPA, right? Just what was that GPA at the time that you are actually applying for that institution? Some institutions will just take a look at like your core class GPA, right? So they'll take like your English courses, your history courses, science and math, mush that together and just look at that core GPA. Some schools will go even further. They'll take a look at, they'll put a little bit more weight on like your sophomore and junior year GPA as opposed to your freshman year GPA. If you're applying to like a really selective and competitive major within a specific school or college, maybe you're going into engineering, right? That engineering program might just take a look at your STEM GPA. Colleges really do kind of slice and dice your transcript all around. So when we say grades, it's a little bit more involved than just typically looking at like a cumulative GPA. Your academic score is also made up of like the strength of your curriculum. So are you taking the most rigorous courses available at your high school? I know when I was reviewing applications, this was a really important factor to me, right? Because sometimes I'd look at students and their GPA is, I don't know, super high, let's say like a 3.8, but then as you dig a little bit further, you realize, okay, this student is doing well, but they're not taking advantage of those honors courses, those AP courses. Like that would give me a little bit of pause to say, okay, why are they not doing that? Like, are they going to be okay in a college level course, right? So admissions officers will look at that as well. Another part of your academic score is actually your high school, right? So if you think about it, most admissions offices group their counselors into different territories. And certainly they do that for like travel planning and purposes like that. But one benefit of that is that those admissions officers in those territories really get to know the high schools that they're working with, right? So they'll know, like the profile of that high school. They'll know the ins and outs of the curriculum and the activities at that high school. They'll also tend to know and take a look at, okay, did anyone from this high school attend our institution in the past and how did they do, right? This is like if you go to like in-person college fairs, you probably will see the same admissions officers at the ones near you from the same schools because they're assigned to that territory directly. And then the final component of the academic score is test scores, right? So certainly, the SAT, the ACT, your AP scores. I definitely have seen a trend as more and more schools have gone test optional, either purposefully or, because of the pandemic. The weight of those AP classes are really playing a pretty big role for most institutions when they're factoring test scores into the overall academic score. So again, all of these components are going into one academic score. Right.
Yeah. Colleges, and what's interesting is like you can kind of tell like this is a little more involved than you might think it is, right? The schools are a little bit actually a bit more sophisticated than you might think here, right? They're actually looking at the data that says, okay, students that have these types of grades, scores, profiles do better academically, like at our college. Okay. That's kind of what they're looking at. Okay. And then on the personal score side, this is where things really kind of get mixed up, right? Where it's like your activities, but not just the activities you're doing, but like specifically, what did you do in those activities? What did you write about? The essays, what did you write about? How did you write about it? Recommendations, interview if applicable. Abby, anything else you want to touch on like there? We're going to dive in deep on this.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of data around that personal score, but I think students would often be surprised at how much weight is in that personal score. And we're really going to dive into the data to kind of showcase that.
Yeah, and we're not going to talk too much about like test scores and other things like that here this evening. We might maybe during Q&A towards the end of it, but I'm not going to cover that now. The other thing is like schools have a bunch of other priorities. These are things that you probably can't affect too much, so we're not going to talk much about them now. The one thing I'll say is demonstrated interest, which is that if the college wants to know that if they accept you, you're going to attend there. Okay. Yeah. So if you, right? Like, isn't that a cool concept? You know what, guess what? When a student gets into like 10 or 100 colleges, whatever the crazy number they're applying to, they can only attend one, right? And so all the schools that are left out of that's kind of a miss for them. And so this is actually really important to colleges, what's called yield. So out of the number of students they accept, let's say they accept 1,000 students and 500 attend, that's 50% yield. that's pretty good. If they accept 1,000 students and 10 attend, that's really bad. Okay. And that reflects poorly on their US News rankings and many other things. So that's the one piece where it's like, hey, this is the Why Us essay. This is the, have you signed up for the mailing lists, for the schools like newsletters, and do you, attend some of the events? Have you visited campus? Like all of these things kind of can fit into there, but we won't talk much about that this evening. But like, how do these things play, right? So generally speaking, you have the academic score, you have the personal score. Easiest way to think about this, the higher both of those scores are, the higher your admission chances, right? Simple. But there's another kind of couple of really important concepts. One is called the academic bar, the other is called the personal bar, okay? And what the academic bar is basically once you're above a certain academic score, that college knows that you're going to be very likely to succeed academically at that college. If you're below that academic bar, they have a bunch of data that says, hey, students that are below this academic bar, much less likely to succeed, which means that they might not graduate, other kind of things like that. So basically, like, you just need to be above that, and then you have a pretty good shot. If you're below that, you might not have any shot, no matter how good your essays are, okay? Same goes with the personal bar. However, very few people are below the personal bar. Basically, you have to write about like how you're a criminal or just like a horrible person in your essays, like that sort of thing, where you're going to be like, actually, we probably shouldn't admit something that student, there's something probably wrong with them. So you don't have to worry too much about that. But how does this kind of play into admissions, right? What's really interesting here, I'm going to let Abby talk a little bit about this in a second, because she's kind of seen this on the admissions side, like really playing out. But roughly speaking, 4 and 5 applicants to any particular college, let's say a fairly selective college, like an Ivy League, Ivy equivalent, University of Michigan, UNC, you name it, right? About 4 and 5 of those applicants are actually above that school's academic bar. Why is that? It's because students, like, and parents, right, families are applying to schools based off of their students' academic profile, right? So your test scores, your GPA, maybe the strength of curriculum that you have. And so most people that are applying to these institutions know that they have a profile that kind of fits them, okay? Now, what that means, though, is that, okay, 4 and 5 are above that. 4 and 5, the college thinks could do the work, but guess what? They might only accept 1 in 5 or 1 in 50, right? And so, for example, at a school like Harvard that gets 60,000 applicants a year, they accept 2,000, or UPenn, right? Very similar. And so in that regard, there's so many students above the academic bar, so many students that are even have strong academics that are not being admitted. Okay. And this is really important concept, because this is when, now we're going to talk about the personal score in a second, but this is really critical, right? Is to understand that you are probably very similar to tens of thousands of other applicants academically, where it's very hard to differentiate between you. Okay, Abby, anything there that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there, right? There's so many times that I can count where I was reviewing applicants, and on paper, academically, you'll have hundreds of students who look similarly from that academic side, right? So this is why colleges, and I usually say this to students, and a lot of times students will be like, oh yeah, duh, that's a very like obvious thing to say, but every part of the application really matters, right? Because if it didn't, that college, that admissions committee would have gotten rid of that question, right? So that means all of this work that you are kind of doing when you actually go to apply to colleges, right? Like your academics, for the most part, like when you're ready to actually start your applications, those are kind of set in stone, right? But the things that you have control over, really everything in that personal score, that's what colleges are looking at to make those those really tough decisions.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about the personal score is you have so much control over it that only 1 in 5 students actually have strong personal scores. Okay. And it's very hard to be exceptional. Like those are like I can't even describe like the crazy things that they're doing, right? It's like, 5 applicants a year, right? Kind of like 50, 60,000, right? But that's where you want to be, is that strong category. And what's interesting is that what we find is that a ton of the students that are actually fall into the sufficient category could have been in the strong category if they had written about their experiences and what they did in the right way with what admissions officers are looking for. And Abby, you probably saw this all the time in applications where you were like, hey, here's something that I wish, like, I feel like this kid is way more than what is on this
Oh,
application.
100%, right? You get that, like maybe that little nugget in an activity list or that little mention of something in the essay, but the student just didn't go down that path. And, or a recommender, right, mentioned something and you're like, whoa, this didn't even appear anywhere on this application. Like, I wish I knew more about that. Yeah, unfortunately, you see it all the time.
Yeah. And where do those typically end up?
I mean, again, unfortunately, when you're in that in that seat where you have to make that decision, you have to go with the information that's in front of you, right? You can't make inferences based off of, maybe a glimmer of something happening, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, like, this whole process of really understanding what admissions officers are looking for, you have about 1,500 to 2,000 words generally total across your application to tell kind of like all of the most compelling parts of who you are in a way that is going to, pique somebody like Abby's interest, which is, oftentimes somebody that's, a relatively recent graduate of that college. All right. So what does this mean, right? So the data shows that having strong academics can increase your admission chances by 3x. The strong non-academics, that personal score, the essays, increase your admission chances by 10x that of other students. That's how important this is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about really quickly when essays matter and when they don't. This will help you kind of think through like how much time, effort, etc. that you may need to put into this. Then we're going to get into what colleges are really looking for in essays. So basically, general gist of it, essays matter more for highly selective colleges. These are colleges with under a 15% admit rate. Selective colleges, which is 15 to 50% admit rates, where your academics are kind of sufficient, but they're not strong, right? So you're in that above academic bar, 4 out of 5, but you're in like the middle 2 out of 5, essentially, of that, right? You're not in the strong category. And they also really matter for larger colleges where you're applying to highly desirable programs. Okay. So this would be like computer science at the University of Washington, for example, right? Very competitive program to get into, but if you're applying to humanities at the University of Washington, they have much higher admit rates. Okay. It could also be desirable out-of-state destinations, such as if you're like out of state and applying to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, for example, that becomes much more difficult. Essays can matter quite a bit more. Okay. Essays matter less for selective colleges where your academics are really strong compared to other applicants. Okay. This tends to be, let's say like Georgia Tech, for example, you have really strong academics. They accept a lot more students there in general. You might have just sufficient essays and can still, are being admitted. But it's very hard to tell, by the way, how strong your academics are compared to other applicants, because as you saw, 4 and 5 applicants are above that academic bar, right? And it's not like they're releasing information. It's like, here's our exact formula, figure out where you are, right? They're not doing that. So I would say it's like, usually the general gist of this is, hey, just put the effort in on the essays, like do your best job, understand where, what colleges are looking for, because you're often not sure kind of where you fit, okay, in the grand scheme of things. All right, Abby, anything else you wanted to add here?
No, I mean, I think, yeah, essays really, and I know this sounds silly, but they all matter across the board, right? Certainly when you're applying to those really highly selective schools, it's a huge component of like what we're able to pull from that personal score to kind of help make our decisions. But even if you're applying to a selective institution where you feel like you're academically pretty strong and qualified, it's not going to help to kind of secure that with a really strong set of essays, right?
Yeah. All right. So really briefly, some of you may know this now already because you might have looked into this, but generally speaking, you might be writing a lot more essays than you think you are. Okay. Or might be, if this is your first student kind of going through this process. At less selected colleges, you might only write the common application essay, or you might not need to write any essays. You write an activities list, you might write additional information. You might have these like extra essays called supplements. That's fine. When you start getting more selective, the more selective the college is, often the more essays that they have. All right. So, you might be applying and you might have the common app essay plus 2, 3, 4, 5 supplemental, what we call supplemental, so extra essays that you need to write. Or you might be applying to highly selective institutions where some students might be writing 20, 40, 50 plus essays kind of across their applications. Some schools have just 1 extra essay. Some have like 8, for example, or 9, right? It really just depends. Some of those essays vary in length from like 35 words to like 500 plus words, right? It's kind of all over the place. And different schools are often asking for different things, right? That they're across what they're looking for in their applications. So let's talk about what colleges are and aren't looking for in essays, right? And once again, like, let's remember that the purpose of the college application is to actually prove your student will succeed in college and after they graduate. I'm going to talk about how do you actually prove that. But first, like, what's interesting is that where is that? What's interesting, and I apparently hit a couple buttons here, is that everybody that you talk to, or your students may be talking to, or you may be seeing, or you may be reading online, is that, okay, what am I supposed to do for essays? And usually it says essays like you should tell your story, or, hey, admissions officers are often, Abby, you probably use this line, oh, we just want to get to know you.
I know, it's a little embarrassing now looking at it, looking back at it.
Yeah, after Abby joined us and she started looking at like how we think about things, she's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I've been doing a disservice to all these kids, for all these years. But why do they say that? Like they don't want to like provide you with too much information that then will change maybe kind of like, what you might write about, but they should be providing more. And so this gets this huge myth, which is that essays are about telling your story. That is true, but it's also not complete information, right? Abby, like what is it really about? Like, what are you actually really looking for here?
Well, 100%. As much as I personally, Abby, not an admissions counselor, would love to hear your life story, Abby, as an admissions counselor, only has a set number of time to read your application, right? So what we're really trying to get when we're saying, we want to hear about you, we want to hear your story, is we want to hear your specific story that is going to show that you'll be successful in college and beyond, right? You have to be very intentional about the story that you choose, because it really needs to reveal something about your character that's going to prove to that admissions reader that you are able to be successful in college and beyond, is really what it boils down to.
Yeah, Stacy has a really good question here, Abby, which is there a specific order that you read the essays in?
Yeah,
I think that varies by officer, right?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I literally just started typing my reply to Steve. But every admissions officer really kind of has their groove that they like approach an application with. Generally speaking, though, most admissions officers, in my experience, are going to go to that personal statement first, because it's the one that's going to give, there's a little bit more freedom in what the student can actually choose to write about. And that kind of reveals something about the student. So yeah, as an admissions, even before I would look at transcripts and things like that, I would go to that personal statement first, and
that's the common application essay. Okay. Yeah. So it's the 651, the one that you use across like a bunch of applications, right? Okay, cool. All right. So what are they looking for? So we've tried to make this simple. Okay. And this is, by the way, like the slide that everybody's screenshotting, taking pictures of, telling their students about, whatever it is, right? This is kind of at the core of a lot of the coaching that we do, which is the 5 traits the colleges look for in applicants. Okay. I'm going to be go through quickly, talk about each of these. Abby's going to touch on the ones that she was like, oh yeah, this is the stuff here. But this is really important. And if you don't have your student today, have them watch at least this part of it, or we have a bunch of content on our website as well that you can take a look at. But the first trait is drive. So these are students that are really driven, right? They're gritty, they're perseverant. Whenever they're coming across a challenging situation, they're getting through it. But not only are they getting through it, they're coming out a better person, and they're taking actions to actually get through that situation and come out it better. Okay. Colleges love these driven students. I remember I was talking to the dean of admissions at MIT a number of years ago about the 5 traits, and he was like, yeah, we love driven students. We actually are looking for students that are unusually driven, which basically is like, in this pool of extremely driven students, that every single person that's applying here is really driven, we are looking for the students that set themselves apart as being even more driven. Okay. And that's hard to do in an application. A lot of that's like how you write about your experience, how you write about what specifically you did. Okay. The second is intellectual curiosity. These are students that love just learning for the fun of it in their free time to get a deeper understanding of their subjects, topics that they're interested in. We often find that students like are really intellectually curious, but they don't realize that admissions officers actually want to know about that. Okay. Because guess what? This is like normal to you. It's like stuff you do outside the classroom, but it may not be normal for other applicants. Okay. And admissions officers want to know that. Intellectual curiosity matters so much that Emory actually calls their personal score the intellectual curiosity score. Third is initiative. These are students that are very entrepreneurial, never really willing to accept the status quo. Whatever they're a part of, they tend to be like, this could be better. And not only are they identifying how it could be better, they're then taking actions to make it better. These are often the leaders, whether or not it's a formal leadership role or just, hey, I'm just going to go out and lead and make this group or make this thing better. That's who they are. The fourth is contribution. These are students that no matter what group of people they're a part of, that group is substantially better as a result of their being there. Colleges love these contributors because these are the people that Abby was talking about before that are like, hey, I'm picturing you on the campus community. I want you to add value to the campus community. These are like the super connectors. These are the people that are the connective tissue across the entire campus. And colleges love these students because it makes everybody else around them better. And then the fifth trait is diversity of experiences and interests. Okay. Colleges want people with different life experiences, different interests, different ways of thinking about the world that add unique perspectives to the student body, such that students can more easily learn from one another. Usually here's where I tell a really bad joke that like even Princeton or UPenn doesn't want everybody going into finance on Wall Street, but it always lands poorly. So I'm not going to do it here. And Abby's just like, again.
We want like a couple of them, but not too many.
Yeah, not too many. But you know what? If depending on how you admitted students and what they were interested in, you could have a lot, right? That's my point. Or literally everybody wanting to be a doctor, right? These are the things that happen. Abby, anything you wanted to touch on? Like, which of these are like, hey, this was your jam?
Yeah, no, it's interesting when I think back on students that really, I mean, I've never quantified how many essays and applications I've read in my 10 years in admissions, but it has to be thousands. But when I think and reflect on the students who like really still stick out of those thousands of applicants, the intellectual curiosity students honestly always stick out because their essays, you can honestly feel like the passion through the essays. And that's always a nice thing as an admissions officer, like to be able to kind of make that connection a little bit, right? Even when I would interview students, you would find that those students who are intellectually curious, that is such a strong thread throughout everything that they're doing. It's going to come up in multiple places. And it's interesting, someone in the chat mentioned, isn't this a little bit repetitive from your activities list? A little bit, but your activities list is just a list, right? It's not, there's not detail there. Your essays is where you actually get to provide that detail and use those activities and those experiences to really highlight your strongest traits, right? So they should, they'll complement a little bit, but certainly not repetitive. And then I think the trait that I'd say maybe a lot of students kind of overlook, but I always loved these students were contributors, right? I think a lot of times students will say, well, like, sure, I contribute to these things, but they don't actually take the time to really realize how much of an impact as contributors they have had on their schools, on their communities, on their peer groups. I love students who showcase contribution. I would always find that contributors had really strong letters of recommendation because they were usually those students in their schools all the teachers knew, all the administrators knew. They were like the lifeblood of their class, right? So contributors were always people that I love to see, because I would know, okay, if I admit this student and they come here, they're going to immediately be involved on campus.
Yeah, I remember one time we were doing I was doing an in-person workshop at a school in here in New York City, and we had everybody, everybody was like having a little bit of trouble with the 5 traits, and we're like, okay, because they were identifying which were their strengths and like ideas behind it. So we actually had their friends, other class members, basically tell them what they were really good at. And like it like was a lot of interesting light bulb moments for a lot of other students that were like, wait, that's kind of how my peers actually think about me. And oh, maybe that is like actually something that's really compelling, right? And so it really helped a lot of students kind of get there with this. But you also don't need to cover all 5, right? So as Abby was saying, it's like, hey, these students that are super intellectually curious, like it shows up like everywhere, right? The students that are super driven are like, it shows up everywhere, like in every single thing that they're writing about. They're like, they're driven here, they're driven here, they're driven here. And so what you want to do is you really want to focus on really highlighting in a major way 2 or 3 of these strengths. Okay, you don't need to do all 5. Now, you might find pieces of all 5 kind of across everything, but you want to hone in on like, these are my strengths. This is what I'm really, truly exceptional at. Okay. The other thing I want to mention is that what do we learn? Like, just distilling this down, is that the content clarity and readability is really critical for understanding the content related to your experiences related to these 5 traits. Creativity, we note how we have not literally talked about like using metaphors, using similes, beautiful prose, creative writing. These are things that we have not really discussed. And so Abby, do you want to touch on that briefly?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, after you've read a couple hundred essays, sure, an essay that is really well written and a little bit pretty is nice to see. But honestly, when it comes down to it, college admissions officers care so much more about your potential to succeed, right? And getting to kind of the crux of those traits and seeing those really easily in your essay. Just from a very like realistic standpoint, admissions officers have a lot of applications to read in a really short amount of time, right? You don't have a lot of time to kind of try to stumble, like wade your way through like maybe a poorly constructed metaphor or 2, or, to kind of get down to that meat. So I think a lot of times students too feel that they have to continuously keep working on their essays to like add in those metaphors at the end. It's much more simple than that, right? It's really important that the admissions officer is going to be able to easily read through those 650 words in a couple minutes.
Yeah, so I mean, we have a question from Carrie here. How do you write an attention-grabbing essay if it's not creative at the top? Okay. Actually way simpler than you think, but Abby, you want to touch on that? I mean, anything can grab attention reasonably well, right?
Yeah,
just even something that's like a short sentence with sentence variation.
Right? I've read so many essays where like the intro part of the essay is like multiple paragraphs, right? Like you're using valuable space, you have limited space. If you're using too much space on the intro, that's not enough time to actually get to the substance, right? I actually think, our writing coaches at Prompt do a really good job of helping students come up with that like 1 or 2 line hook to like set the stage, and then they immediately move into that substance, which is like where we're trying to go anyway.
Yeah, and usually it's like it's just setting a basic scene. Like it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be creative. A lot of times the best first sentences are like 4 words, 5 words, 3 words, like short, right? Followed by a sentence that's like maybe 8 words, right? Like it's not, and I say this because I'm literally a writing instructor, right? So like what's weird is you can make something that's really uninteresting, extremely interesting to read by literally varying sentence length and structure. Like there's so many different strategies here that, the key point is be really concise, set the tone, make it kind of interesting, but easy to read such that somebody like Abby's like, I know like within the first few sentences, you're like, I have a good feeling I know exactly where this essay is heading and I like it, right? Like I want to then read like the rest of it. Like you want them, it's like, it's what I call like the accept mindset. Like, it's like, okay, I could see myself accepting the student. Keep them in that mindset. Once they start thinking like, I don't know what the heck is going on here, they start shifting to reject.
Yep.
And once you're in reject, it is so hard to get back to accept. Is that kind of surmise it a little bit? Because I mean, you're reading so many of these.
No,
right?
100%, 100%. And it gets to a point where it's a little like subconscious, but that's very true, right? I want to get to the end of those essays and like really have a clear idea of like how this student is going to contribute to campus, and how, you know, admissions officers also talk a lot about the word fit, which is also a very like unclear term that they throw out there expecting that everyone understands it. But it's really being able to picture, you know, the student is going to contribute to our campus in these ways, and then our campus and our resources are going to be able to help this person grow, right? It is that mutual benefit, right? And as soon as admissions officers are really starting to see that, I mean, that's golden.
Yeah, we have a good one here. We'll take right now, which is top things that get this officer into reject mode. I would imagine just like unclear writing.
Yeah.
Would be like number one, other than being like, I am a horrible person, and like literally almost writing that on the page, right?
Yeah, like starting an essay with, this is the day that I stole from X, like, right? Unless you're taking it in a different direction, like illicit activity, like, you know.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, think about it this way. You know, how many times do you start reading an article and you're like, I don't know what the heck this is about, where this is going, anything, and you just stop reading it, right? You're like, as an admissions officer, you're not going to stop reading it because you're trying to get the student to get there, to and you want to do them justice.
As you're
kind of crossing your fingers, but you're already like, I don't know what the hell is going on here. You're like, I'm going to spend 8 minutes, maybe maximum, on this entire application. You have limited time. You're not going to spend 5 minutes trying to like critically read through the essay, trying to figure out what the heck the student's trying to say, right? It's just unlikely to happen. Okay, Abby will answer a couple other questions in the chat as we go, but I just wanted to take that one. Like, to me, the worst, the thing that kind of moves people there the most is just unclear, like being unclear. Okay, and that can go for like, I don't know what the student's talking about. This is really hard to read. Like, it's just mentally taxing to read. As Abby was telling me earlier, she's like, you know, I was just straight out of college. Like, I was like 4 or 5 years older, and like, I would read these vocabulary words. I'm not going to look them up in Google. Like, you know, like done, right? Like, it's just, you know, you just keep going, right? And yet a lot of students are trying to kind of use these crazy things, or these tropes that they hear, these myths that they hear. And the reason why they hear these things is because in essays is because guess what? The essays that are online that are actually going to get read are the creative ones. They're not going to, like, nobody's going to be like, hey, look at this essay that got the student into UPenn. That's just like solid. Like, it's not particularly creative, like explains the student really, really well, but it's not a fun read, right? The New York Times isn't going to publish that. The New York Times wants to publish the thing that's like super creative, right? What they're looking for and what admissions office is looking for, very different. Okay. And so these examples of essays that you see online that work, like that's not necessarily what you should be mimicking. Okay. All right. The other thing I'll just mention, no such thing as a bad topic, provided it relates to one or more of these 5 traits. You might hear that, okay, writing about athletics, writing about band, writing about drama, theater, sometimes writing about community service, mission trips, like all of that sort of stuff is kind of like, hey, maybe you shouldn't write about it. It's kind of overdone. The answer is like, there's a reason why people say don't write about it, because a lot of people write about it poorly. They don't write about it related to these 5 traits. But guess what? If that's really your most compelling content, and it just so happens that your crazy, awesome leadership driven story occurred during band, or, you know, involved with athletics, write about it, right? Don't worry about it. It's really just about how you write about it that really matters. Okay. All right. Abby already talked about this, but we see this all the time. Abby, what I've heard, 90+% of all applications on the Common App are submitted within 48 hours of the deadline. How obvious is that was
Yeah,
that
I
to
mean,
you?
it just is. Like once you've been doing this even for a little bit, like you can definitely tell. I mean, the most egregious is you like copy and paste and like mention something from another school. But even just if you're like rushing at the end there, it's really, really easy to tell when a student is submitting that application at like 11:59 p.m. on the deadline, right?
Yeah, and you know how you tell is usually that the student's kind of scrambling to write their essays last minute. So it could be the student has a great Common App essay, and then you're reading through some of these extra supplemental essays, and you're like, this is not quality wise, like just even close to being on par.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, if a school has added those supplementals and those specific prompts, there's a really specific reason that they've done that, right? Again, admissions officers, any way that you can pull something out of the application that you're just not using and like can then devote more time to the rest of the app, you do that in your off season. So if it's being asked, it's being looked at.
Yeah, and it's all, and a lot of times that extra stuff is often like critical, really important information that they're looking for. Okay, let's talk about working on your applications. Start now, right? That's the simplest way to put it. Your goal should be to complete your applications for your top 3 choice schools before school starts in the fall, if you're a senior. If you're not going to be a senior and you're an underclassman, it's really helpful to kind of plan what content you might write about in your essays. You don't need to write your essays, because that whole like planning process and identifying the traits and your experiences related to that is actually really helpful for you as you're thinking through, hey, what else can I do over the next year to make my content more compelling? All right. But our process is very much, okay, let's get started now. In June, let's get your common application essay done. Then we're going to work on your application for your top choice school. Once those supplemental essays are released, which some schools start releasing them now, or in July, all of them are typically released by early August. And then we work application by application. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that in our process, what we do is we make sure that we identify all of the students' most compelling content that needs to make it onto each application at the beginning of the process. Then we match that content to the different essays that they need to write. Okay. And so we finish one application, and then we map those essays and that content to the next application and modify it, adjust it as needed to make that holistic story for the next application, and then the next application, and so on and so forth. We find that students that do this and do this well, which we have these these student success managers that kind of keep students on track and making sure that they're getting the stuff done, have a much more enjoyable senior year, because all of they're kind of done. Their friends are scrambling on all these essays. They get to focus on the activities. They get to focus on the schoolwork. They get to focus on having a good time. And you as a parent are not butting heads with your student the whole summer and the whole fall to make sure that they get this stuff done. And that, by the way, by doing this, you're going to be really confident in the applications that you're submitting, right? That's the really, really, really important part of this, is confidence. You want to make sure that when you submit that application, that you feel like this is the absolute best that I could have done, versus, as we were talking about, many of the students scrambling at the last minute and be like, oh, thank goodness I just got it in, right? You want to think, hey, this is my best work. I have a real shot here. Okay. All right, we're going to talk a little about our coaching, and we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. We're going to look at a couple example essays, do some more Q&A, wrap up. Okay. So our coaching, our goal is to make your application impossible to ignore. Okay. So that's when an admissions officer's reading, they're just like, oh yeah. And it just like keeps checking those boxes of like what exactly they're looking for. We're the highest rated, most recommended college application and essay coaching company. 98% of the students we work with get into one or more of the reach or target colleges. 3 and 4 get into one or more reach colleges, right? Which means that, yes, they're probably above the academic bar, but they're applying to fairly selective institutions, and they're having a lot of success with that. We've also have like over 250 high schools that actually recommend our services, many others as well. And this is why Road to College works with us. A lot of success, and we're also half the price or less of comparable application and essay coaching companies. We also have a bunch of free resources and essay boot camps, essay reviews that are eligible for students with free and reduced lunch programs. There's ways to sign up for that on our website if you just go to create an account at myprompt.com/road to college. But you can also view kind of all of our pricing and coaching options there. All right. In terms of what are we doing, what are we delivering, is the most important things are, one, really compelling content, making sure that your student is kind of developing their personal brand, like what are they trying to stand for across their application, identifying kind of what to write about for each part of the application. The second is like clear writing. This is so important. And that's helping your student make their ideas really concise and compelling. Okay, making that writing really clear. As I said, you only have 1,500 to maybe 2,000 words total. A lot of students have so much compelling content. It's really hard to fit it into that space. But what we often find is that when we see a draft of a student, and these are drafts a lot of times that would probably be the essays that maybe a student would be submitting to college, usually they can say everything that they're saying in that essay much better, much more concisely, in about 40% of the word count. Okay, so now all of a sudden you can start reducing word count, making stuff more concise, fitting in a lot more compelling content. And then finally, it's holding your student accountable, right? As I was saying, like, students love procrastinating. Over 90% of them are submitting their applications within 48 hours of the deadline. And it's helpful to just have somebody there that's like, hey, do this, like, here's the due date, holding them accountable, messaging them when they're behind, reminding them what to do stuff, etc. All right. We have the personal coach for your student. We have 100 coaches, varying different backgrounds. The one common thread is they're really good at coaching writing. They've gone through a very rigorous training and evaluation process that we have, and we match coaches based off of their target college list, their ambitions, and their learning style. We have 2 people that you work with, your student success manager that kind of creates a personalized timeline for your student, monitors their progress, helps them stay on track. And then their writing coach, who does video calls with the student to help them get started and plan their writing, and then provides written feedback on all of the drafts of all these different essays that they're writing. In terms of like, how do we work with students? We have these packages where you can just work with us on a common application essay package. Or you can work on your application for 1 school, 3 schools, 6 schools, or all of your schools that you are doing. When we talk about 1 school or 3 schools, like when we talk about a school, we mean every single written component of that application. So that includes the common application essay, all the supplemental essays that you might need to write, including ones that might be for a specific major program, scholarships at a specific school, the activities list, the additional information section. If there's a portfolio that has written components to it, all of that is included within that thing. Okay. We have discounts going through Sunday at midnight. Also tonight till midnight Pacific time, we have an extra discount tonight. So you can get started with the common application essay package, normally $599, $150 savings if you do it tonight, which is an extra $50 savings for tonight. You can get $350 off on our 3 schools. This is the most popular actually that we have, support on your basically your top 3 choice schools for applications. And you're actually getting an extra $350 savings tonight. So I think that's an extra $100 off this evening. We also have an extra discount, the same discount on all schools. So if you're interested in doing this is completely risk-free. If you're not satisfied after your first coaching call with your coach, you can get a full refund. So I highly recommend taking advantage of this tonight if you're looking at doing that. If you have questions, you can also go to the website, myprompt.com/road to college, and you can set up a time for us to call you. Or you can actually email us directly, or you can email me personally directly if you have some questions, and I'll respond at brad@myprompt.com, and Abby will drop that in as well. Abby, anything you want to add just on our coaching before we get to all the Q&A and all of the looking at some essays and all that sort of fun stuff.
Yeah. Sorry if I repeat something that you said. I was furiously trying to keep up with the chat, but I think the thing that I think stands out in terms of our coaching is I know, and I can tell by some of the questions, that this seems like can be a really overwhelming process. But I promise the way that we have structured with how you work with your writing coach, how you work with your student success manager, the level of brainstorming and deep diving and planning that you do actually makes this process so much more manageable. I really think we have it down to a science a little bit in terms of how you move through. And it doesn't matter if you're applying to a handful of schools, or I think there was someone in the chat that was planning on applying to maybe like 30 plus institutions. It might seem like you have hundreds of essays to write. I mean, maybe you do if you're applying to 30 schools, but it's all doable. I promise it's doable.
Yeah.
Not only is it doable, but it's doable like this summer. Like literally by the end of your summer, you can have a nice tan and most of your essays done, right?
Yeah. And by the way, what's interesting is, and I always call this out, and parents, you may not care about this as much, but your kids will care, is that by working with your coach, it'll take your students way less time to get to better essays. Okay. We often see students that spent all summer on their essay, like perseverating. Sorry, I'm busting out like huge vocabulary words now. As I'm wont to do sometimes. Just kind of thinking about it, like constantly kind of tinkering with their essay. And then they come to us like in September, October, and it turns out that they were focused on completely the wrong things and need to start over again. That's not what you want. Right. What you want to do is just start now, start at the beginning of the process, working with a coach to kind of help them plan their writing from the beginning, and get to a good place, and they will spend substantially less time. They'll be a lot less stressed. They'll feel really good about it. And you and your students will feel confident in submitting those applications. All right. Abby, any questions that have come in, or we're going to do some that you want to touch on now, or I'm going to pull up a couple of essays.
I think let's pull up some essays. I think that'll be good.
Okay, cool. And this is, by the way, you can leave now if you want, but guess what? This is pretty fun. So highly recommend sticking around. Because you'll start seeing like, oh, so this is kind of how admissions officers, or these are how they're reading it, or this is how it could be improved upon. All right, I have a bunch of these up, so I'm just going to randomly pick some. I just have to pick one with a lot of blue text. Okay, immediately, by the way, I can just see this and I just don't even want to read it just because the paragraphs are so long. So I'm going to read it out loud. Abby's laughing, but she knows.
I know, it's so true though. Look, it's a wall of
text.
It's
so true. You're just like, oh, this is a really long first paragraph. And it's just like, you don't even want to read it. Okay, let's jump in. Or literally, it looks like we're going to dive in now that I see an Olympic-sized swimming pool here. All right, I'm going to read it out loud. Drop into the chat, which traits have you seen in the essay? And then on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong was that trait? Like, so is this student might be driven, but is it like kind of a weak driven? Or is it like, oh my goodness, this is like the most driven student ever? Okay. Abby and I have not looked at this essay at all. Abby is giving some weird looks. I think she might be reading it. Don't read it yet. We're reading it live. Let's do it together. She's just like this. She's just,
you gotta dive in. That's what you do when you see it.
That's what you do. You're just like, I'm going for it. Okay. 100 yards long, 12 feet deep, the Olympic-sized swimming pool being over 3 times the height of me. Being a first grader, looking into this vast body of water was not just intimidating, but also intriguing, wondering how to conquer getting to the other side. Seeing older kids take on the challenge of getting across with ease gave me a sense of confidence to try. And before I knew it, I got into a rhythm. Getting to the other side of the pool at first terrified me, but each stroke got easier with time. Year by year, the sport drew me back, not only for the rush of adrenaline, but the community. 11 years after beginning, I finally got to become a coach for first-year swimmers, teaching me new lessons every day. Not every practice was easy, but we got through every practice together. 1 step forward, but 3 steps back sums up the sport of swimming best, but also the game of life. No matter what, though, you end up getting from point A to point B. The twist about both, though, is that you never just know just how you will get there. Just how you will get there. Growing into the role of a coach allows me to see reflections of myself. Each kid with different personalities and capabilities fits into my heart like a piece of a puzzle. Some days filled with tears, others with laughter. One day, I hope that they know just how much they have taught me. Connor, one of the 8-year-old boys, taught me a lesson I never would have thought to learn from someone so young. Every practice, we would work together, getting stronger and learning to dive. Connor got comfortable swimming, but suddenly felt he could not swim at his first meet. Seeing a deeper pool and feeling pressure from others left him paralyzed. Each week, he would step up to the pool and then back down. But this last meet, something sparked where he became confident enough to race. After months of practicing, convincing, and lots of tears, he finally achieved his goal. Connor finished his race. Similar to Connor in swimming, simple life became very hard for me. Over time, my anxiety grew from not going to school to not even going out with friends. Connor and I had more in common than he knew. Each day for me was the equivalent of a big pool for Connor. In the morning, I felt confident to overcome my worries. But by the time school came around, panic attacks and trips to the social worker consumed my thoughts. I was paralyzed, feeling as if I could not make it through the day. My anxieties caused me to burn out or put on a fake face towards others. The other side of the pool began to feel so far away. Just like Connor, I thought I would drown. Although for a kid, there was a lack of light, these kids brought back my spark back. Seeing not only Connor, but the kids I coached overcome fears truly helped me grow. If I could guide my kids through overcoming fears, why couldn't I too? I began to come to school much more frequently, kept a smile on my face, and enjoyed living life. After a whole season of encouragement, these once strangers became the people I will always remember. Every week, I slowly saw myself come back, simultaneously seeing each swimmer grow. Every day, I told them just to keep swimming because no matter what you do, the wall will always be at the other end to support you. I've realized that these kids are my wall, the support I needed. Change in my mindset helped me guide me through this hard patch in my life. I am so grateful for each bond and individual who flipped my life upside down, even if they don't realize it. Because of them, I am myself again. Every day, I get better, not only for myself, but for the people around me. Becoming Coach Kit Kat was one of the best things that has happened to me. I was able to learn new perspectives of life and was shown a new appreciation for the sport I've done my whole life. Learning new things every day, not only as a coach, but becoming a better person was my favorite part of the St. Rose swim team. Applying values of swimming to real life helped me. One day, I hope to realize the kind letters and hugs that they gave me post-race meant more to me than they know. I have learned that a rough patch in life is nothing more than just a patch. There will always be someone or something that comes into your life to help overcome blockades. Just like I told Connor to do, I just kept swimming. All right. So as I said, drop into the chat. What traits did you see? And then also like how strong were those traits kind of on a scale of 1 to 10? All right. So Abby, put you on the spot first.
In terms of like traits.
Yeah, well, not just traits, but just like your overall like thought on the essay. Like what were the things that kind of stood out to you? What were the things like,
Yep.
That you're like, I don't know what's going on here. Like how would you perceive this?
No, I think what we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, I think the intro to this essay is quite long, right? I know at some point, kind of spaced out a little bit before then, but at some point the writer gets to a point where they're actually starting to make the comparisons, right, between swimming and coaching and some of these character traits that they have, but that happens so far down in this essay, right? I also feel like I might know just as much about Connor, and maybe I'm admitting Connor as well, right? I'm reviewing Connor for admission, which, not necessarily a terrible thing, but
yeah, Connor might be 8 currently.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Right, maybe 10.
But we hear about Connor just as much as we hear about the student themselves, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, what is your thought on just like how this student approached anxiety in this essay? Because
Yeah.
that's a
So,
common topic that we,
oh, 100%, 100%. So I think the student mentions anxiety and mentions overcoming anxiety at some point, but there's a big gap there. Like that why and how I find is very much so missing from the essay itself.
yeah. And I think one of the things related to this topic that makes it difficult to write about is exactly what Abby is saying, right? Is so if you think about like colleges want students that are going to be successful in college and beyond, students that have anxiety that may not be like clearly overcome based off of the writing or the content of the application, are potentially at risk. Okay, in terms of not being able to graduate, not succeeding on college, and so therefore maybe less likely from an admission standpoint. Okay, not saying it's something you don't want to write about if it's like a really compelling story, if it's really who you are, that this journey of kind of overcoming this, figuring out who you are, but proving that this is not is very unlikely to be a continuing issue, a continuing thing, is important, I would say. Would you say that as well, Abby?
100%, right. I think,
Yeah.
At this point, I feel like I've seen so many students who write about anxiety and mental health that, it's not, like we mentioned before, really anything can be an essay topic, right? As long as it's showcasing these traits. This is a tricky area to walk through, but as Brad mentioned, if there's more substance in terms of actual tangible like examples, and it's very clear to the reader how the student has overcome, what they've learned now, how they will approach college and future moments that make them anxious, that's getting better, but it is a tricky.
I think that the main thing here is like, you can tell me that, hey, I've overcome this through swimming, but then I need concrete other examples and actions that you've taken after this rough patch that shows that, okay, it was just a rough patch, we're good, right? And I think that's really important. That's clearly missing here. And by the way, that's not just related to this type of topic, but this is one of the most common things that we see as writing coaches is, okay, so you're telling me you learned this thing, or you telling me this about this experience, and this is now who you are. Well, prove it to me. Prove to me that you are a bit different. Prove to me that you're super driven. Like, show me other examples. Show me other actions that you have taken. And that's one of the most common pieces of feedback we provide. But I think the most, like, one of the most important things here is just not necessarily the style of writing, but the structure of the writing. So the challenge here is that I really have no idea where this essay is heading at basically any point in the essay. So I start by thinking, okay, this is a swimming essay. All right, this is going to be an essay about this kid swimming. Great. I've seen that a bunch of times. Okay. Oh, he's mentioning coaching. Oh, maybe it's going to be an essay about him being a swim coach. And then it's an essay about overcoming anxiety as it relates to being a swim coach. And I don't really learn about that until way down in the essay. So I am just like, it now, the problem is, as a reader, it's not very clear. And I haven't really necessarily remembered some of the other stuff that I've read in the essay to connect it to the other content. Right. And so it's really hard for me to have an understanding of where this is heading. And I think this is where a lot of students really struggle, is that sometimes, like, I don't actually understand what the heck they're trying to say until literally like 2/3 of the way through the essay. Whereas what I need to understand is what we don't say it's like, hey, use a thesis statement. What we say is you want to use guiding sentences where it's pretty clear. You're kind of guiding the reader to understand this is what's happening and transpiring in this essay, but you're not like being like, here's the 3 reasons why I am, blah, 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 right? It's like, it's kind of like a watching a TV show or a movie script or reading a book. It's like, usually you kind of know how the whole thing is going to end within the first like couple minutes of the movie. Like you before you even show up to the movie, how it's going to end most of the time, right? And so it's kind of setting it up, but and then what's compelling is like, what is the journey? What is the way that that the character gets there to the end? But you kind of know what the end is. And that's just like general, like how almost all stories are told. and unfortunately, and I know that may not be taught in many schools in many cases, but that's kind of how you have to approach these essays. So that way it's very clear to your reader what is happening and transpiring. Because you're not out to surprise them, you're out to share information, right? That is what you're looking to accomplish.
Right.
Okay, Abby, any other comments that you wanted to add
No,
here?
I like that comment about not surprising them. Being from Philadelphia, from where M. Night Shyamalan is from, you don't want to pull an M. Night Shyamalan in your essay, right? There shouldn't be a surprise twist right at the end.
Yeah, but even then, like, you're like, oh, I get the surprise twist. Oh, I kind of see the through line like the entire time. And it's more of like a sudden realization that, oh yeah, this all like was coming to a head, right? Of this thing, and it all ties neatly together because you actually remembered the important stuff along the way at that point. But that's not the case in like most student writing. Like they're not capable of that. Like what, like probably like 5 high school students a year, maybe across the whole country, or like, like, you know, it's not, we're not talking about large numbers here. You know, it's like handful type situation. Any other questions that have come in that we should take before we'll take a look at one more essay we'll randomly pull up, but I'm glad we randomly selected this one. This was a good read. I think a lot of people learned from.
No, I hope I hit on most of these.
Okay, let me pull out one more. Okay, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Yeah. Let's go with this one. All right, here we go. Oh, one of the other things is like, I generally don't like content about when a student's really young, except from literally maybe a few words that just kind of help with context of like, okay, I need to know this information because it helps me paint a picture for the longer storyline. And I'm only mentioning that because I also see like 11-year-old version. Like that's the first thing I see on this page is 11-year-old. Also, like this is a long first paragraph too. I just want to mention that. I have an aversion. I have a personal aversion to long first paragraphs, but I think if you're reading this number of things, you kind of want to ease the reader into your story, right? And if you see something that's only a few lines long, you're like, okay, I have a pretty good sense of what's happening within just reading these few lines. Okay, let's go. It's going to teach me about losing someone you love. Little did I know it would teach me so much more than that. An 11-year-old version of myself, one that would be featured in the interview prior to the experience, only had a glimpse into the transformative power of selflessness. It was a dew-filled mid-March morning as spring was fighting its way in and winter remained unrelenting. Okay, we'll come back to that sentence later. The date had been determined months prior, nonetheless, had little consequence on the bittersweet feeling felt by both myself and the remainder of my family. The dog that I had called my own for months on end was finally returning to fulfill his training. Although similar to the typical dog raising experience, my role was to provide love, experiences, and training. However, only for months before he would become completely someone else's. That was the role of a seeing eye puppy raiser, a role I assumed unaware of how it would alter my values, thoughts, and self. From the moment I was able to carry him on my own, we created an ineffable bond beyond the simple titles of dog and raiser. He was a 10-pound puppy named Zeno, made of more golden fur than anything else. Frequently finding his way into a shoe closet, he kept me alert to any misdemeanors, or rather teaching opportunities. He was always by my side as part of experiential training or merely as a dear friend. However, only in a retrospective point of view am I able to comprehend the invaluable growth that we both managed to go through. It was high stakes from the start, knowing that not only was someone going to depend on him to live, but also that our days together were numbered. Always in the back of my mind, I was aware of the inexorable passage of time ushering forth the day of departure, the day my dog will be more than just mine. A white van detailed with the emerald green logo of the Seeing Eye slowly reversed into my driveway. Each inch it took towards me, I could see a moment pass by, one of mischief or growth, one of challenge or comedy. At this moment, I was able to finally grapple with how much time with this dog I had not only aided him in growing into what he needed to be, but how it had that same precise effect on me. I felt confident in my ability as its success had been shown through this dog. I've put myself out there without fear of rejection, because if I could do it to give my dog a better experience, I could surely do the same for myself. I knew I poured my being into this dog only for it to no longer need me. It seemed ludicrous, but the constant reminders of how far we had come kept my understanding. I helped him into the back of the van as he looked back at me, just happy to be outside, reminding myself of his purpose, and my own subdued the bitter feelings, yet was unable to vanquish them in their entirety. I watched as they closed the door with Zeno on one side and myself on the other, consequently closing a chapter of my life. The act of relinquishing something beloved proved to be an arduous endeavor, yet the ensuing rewards proved immeasurable. No longer just a companion, he had forever impacted my life and innumerable others. Through Zeno, I will never underestimate the power of changing others' lives, as you can never fully comprehend the profound effect it can have on you. Okay, so once again, feel free to drop in any traits, kind of scale 1 to 10. How did you feel about them? Into the chat. And all right, some diversity experiences here. Abby, I've got so many thoughts, but I will let you share yours first.
Sure. Well, I do agree that this essay, we finally understood what was happening, I think, by that last that last sentence of the first paragraph. There was so much vagueness in the beginning. I was like, where are we going? Right.
Yeah, what's crazy is like, think about, as we were reading this is not the longest first paragraph, but the fact that we all felt, where is this going? Probably every single person here as we were reading this, that shows you just how concise you really need to be. Like, this whole first paragraph could have been 2 to 3 sentences.
Oh, 100%.
We would have lost no understanding about what was occurring. It would have actually helped us understand better.
Yeah, because I think once we got there, I'll agree with the people who are saying diversity of experiences in terms of an interesting trait here, because this is something, if this is not a swimming, a sports, a band essay, right? This is something a little bit unique, which again, as an admissions reader, if we were opening it up and knowing that right away, I would have been much more excited to start reading the essay than like being a little pulled in different directions and then like, oh, okay, here's where we're going to go.
Yeah, literally, you could have just said, it's going to teach me about losing someone you love.
Yep.
I was a seeing eye puppy raiser. Like,
I was going to be ready.
Like, immediately, you're like, oh, I get it. Like, you're raising the dog. Like, everything else was superfluous.
Oh, 100%.
Like, 100%. You literally could just do that. Okay.
And I feel like this essay, I mean, there's a lot of emotion kind of packed into the way that this person writes. But again, when you kind of pull that aside, there's actually not a lot of content in terms of what did they do, right? What did they learn? How did they grow through this experience? And that's what I'm like aching to see that.
Yeah. And by the way, we're seeing a lot of repetition, right? It's basically the same idea or concept, just repeated over and over again with slightly different words. Okay. But what's really important is like, okay, this is a good experience to write about, but it's the how you write about it. So I want to know, like, what are the very specific actions that you took raising Zeno? What were the challenges that you underwent? How did you really legitimately feel when Zeno went away? And then how did this actually affect other parts of your life? So if you said you learned something about yourself, this is the biggest challenge that I think most students have, because a lot of times they read it, they're like, I'm going to write about this one experience. False, right? What you should do is you should be like, here's one experience that then led to these other experiences happening that would maybe not have happened or have happened differently if I didn't do this other thing first. Okay. And this gets into what we talked about last time, which is, okay, so you say you're this changed person, you say you're different, prove it to me.
Yep.
Prove to me that you have changed. Prove to me with other actions that you have now taken. You know, how did this experience kind of, you know, can you tie it to, like, you know, groups of students at school or interacting with other people or like other activities, other things that you've gone and done? Maybe it relates to your future ambitions of like, you know, becoming a dog trainer. I don't know, right? But like those are the things that we kind of want to start tying in and layering into this. Because honestly, I would say this entire essay, in terms of what I learned, could be summarized in about 4 sentences. Okay. And that's not kind of what you want to accomplish, right? You want to get into like the meat of very specifics of what you've done, the impact that you had on Xeno, but maybe others. This is what, you know, you kind of want to accomplish. But this is like this is a common type of essay that we see, and not just, you know, at pretty much every type school, right? Would you say?
100%. I think this is a really typical, like maybe first draft that our writing coaches are used to working with, right?
Yeah.
The amount
But that's also why, Abby, we go through the planning process. So the way you don't even start with this first draft. We actually have an outline. Here's what we're going to write about. Here's the content. A lot of times this is like the type of first draft that like a student might bring to us that they wrote in school and it was like, I already have a first draft. And we're like, you will see about that, right? And they start realizing it's like, actually, I don't have a first draft.
Yeah, right. I have a first idea.
Yeah, I have an idea, right? And I like an interesting nugget of an idea, right? That would be a nice little component in a bigger, broader, you know, storyline. And so, you know, that's like, you know, we always hear, I think a lot of times when we work with students, or they're like worried that like, oh, you know, we already have a draft, or like we're kind of further along. It's like, it's okay. You know, even if you wrote something in school, like just work with a coach, because we're going to start with the planning process and you're going to realize like very quickly that there's a lot that needs to be changed in the essay. Maybe not everything, but you're probably going to rewrite everything. It's just like some of the content might be able to be utilized, or pieces of it, or even little bits of wording. The one other thing I'll just mention is there's a lot of vocabulary in here that is beyond what it needs to be. Okay. So, and the reason why I say that is it makes it much harder to read. Okay. And, you know, does it make you seem more intelligent? Not really. And so one of the things that I highly recommend doing is like, if you're writing something, you can plug it into a readability checker, and you can see like, what is your readability score? And if your readability score is like below a 40, like you're really not doing too well. Like that's like almost like I'm reading like journal articles that are written for like academics, and like nobody wants to read those ever. Even the academics don't want to read those. Like it's just nobody wants to do it, right? And I read a lot of those, and it's like it's painstaking work. You know, so you don't want to necessarily do that. Like you want to be in like where like the New York, you know, and that's like far below 40, right? You want to be kind of like New York Times range, like 40 to 60, like, and you'll see this kind of, you know, if you plug it into like a Grammarly or something like that, it can show you that. But like, it's just like the ease at which like it is to read is really important, because the better the ease of reading, the more likely it is that they will understand what you are saying. Okay. So simple writing actually trumps complex writing every day of the week. It makes you seem more intelligent than complex writing. I didn't realize that when I was in school, because I thought that using complex sentences made me sound smarter, because that's what I was told, that, you know, complex sentences were better. And it turns out like when I write, like my average sentence length is like 12. Okay. Which is very short. That's essentially what, if you look at books, like if you read romance novels, it's actually like an average of 10 words per 10 words per sentence. Action is like 12 words per sentence. Mysteries, I think, are 15. New York Times is like 15 on average. So like, and guess what? A lot of the students we see, it's like they're writing at like 20. And it's like, no, don't do that, right? If the best writers in the world, maybe not the romance writers, but if the best writers in the world are writing at like 12 to 15, that's your ballpark. That's where you're aiming, right? In simple words. Okay, very good. Wrapping up now. Any questions that came in, Abby?
We did have some
Mhm.
questions. Someone asked a little bit ago about upcoming like boot camps or anything like that. Not sure where to direct them.
Yeah, so you can, so we have boot camps on the website at myprompt.com/road to college. If you scroll down, you can actually sign up for one of our small group boot camps. What we do is after you've signed up, we will let you know kind of when the different boot camps are. There's a number of them. And so it's just simpler than us always kind of having to update our website all the time with what the ones are. But the vast majority of students that we work with are do one of the one-on-one options. And as I said, the most popular one is the 3 schools one. If you're interested in getting this, I highly recommend doing it now. Everything is risk-free here. As mentioned, if you're not satisfied after your first coaching call, you can get a full refund. And these are special deals tonight only. There's other discounts that extend through Sunday. And so if you have any questions, feel free to email me at brad@myprompt.com. And we'll go from there. All right. Abby, anything else you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot.
Yes, and we did have a question. Yeah, 3 schools includes every essays for those, so it does include the Common App essay. That is very much correct. It's literally every piece of writing you need to do for that application is included. And some students are doing a lot of writing. That is for sure. Okay. Yeah, so Common Application can be you're probably gonna start your Common App essay now. I know that the Common Application itself kind of switches over, I think, on August 1st. So I wouldn't necessarily start your application in the Common App yet, just in case the schools are going to make changes for next year to the application. Usually they don't make massive changes, but for essays, usually there's like about 30% or so of colleges kind of make some sort of change to an essay per year.
And the Common App prompts you can see for their
you can see the Common App prompts there, or you can just look on our website. If you just create an account at myprompt.com/road to college and you just click sign up, we also have some really cool tools where you can like input all the lists of schools you're applying to, and we'll automatically create a list of every essay you need to write. So we actually track all that information in database there. So we're doing that. All right. Thank you all very much. This was a fun time this evening. I know a lot of people dropped off towards the end. I think they got bored of our essay.
Don't make me read another essay.
Yeah, just is what it is. But I think some people enjoyed it.
100%. Gotta get used to that now.
Yeah, we have to feel good about ourselves, Abby. That's all. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having us, Debbie. Hope you feel better soon.